Welcome everyone to the Flux Dev meeting. Today is June the 23rd. Do we have anyone who's new on the call? Were there action items from last time? No. Okay, good. We can get started. Michael, I think the first one is yours.
Yep. So image automation, it's had about 2 weeks to, well, about 2 weeks ago, I think possibly in this meeting 2 weeks ago, we sort of decided to have a deadline for promoting the image v1 alpha 2 API to v1 beta 1. And I wrote a little bit extra in the original v1 beta 1 proposal. And now it is, I think, 2 weeks later. With the idea was to have the deadline 2 weeks later. So sometime this week, possibly this afternoon, possibly tomorrow, I'm going to put in a PR, which will do that promotion. So with, if you haven't changed anything in the API, then you can just tell Kubernetes to bump the version by just replacing the version and not changing anything about each resource, which makes it very easy for people to migrate because basically they don't have to do anything. And then we can tell people to go and change the version, and then at some point down the road, though not urgently, we can remove v1 alpha 2, deprecate it. So yes, all pretty easy and uncontroversial, I think. One thing to note, just because I saw you unmute yourself, Daniel, I thought I'd say an extra thing. Apparently, lots of people have brought up cross namespace references. So this is, there's a few problems, or there's a few things people run into around trying to use, for instance, a Git repository that is in the Flux system namespace with automation that is in someone else's namespace, which is sort of a natural thing to want to do because you tend to, the Git repository ends up in the Flux system namespace by default, but you often want to have the various image objects in the namespace for the thing they pertain to, the deployments and so on. So people have brought up the having a way of referring to a Git repository across namespaces in relation to the v1 beta 1. So just to put it on record here, v1 beta 1 does not rule that out. It doesn't add it. It can be added backward compatibly later. So these two things are kind of unrelated. So i.e., if that feature is not added before v1 beta 1, it doesn't matter because it can be added later backward compatibly. Okay, I'm done now, I promise.
Are there any questions or feedback?
One more thing. No, only kidding.
Oh, yeah, there you go.
I will take questions. Nope. Okay. Let's go.
There are some things on Slack.
There's some questions on Slack.
Yeah, like people said they have to create 120 files and Kubernetes objects to manage all their deployments because they have 80 deployments.
So this is about the cross namespace thing?
Well, if we don't allow cross namespace thing, then it's 320 objects because you also have to create the Git repository and it's secret. So.
Okay, but this is unrelated to the v1 beta 1 thing.
Yeah, it's not, it's
Yeah, okay.
about the API in general. Like I've seen
Yeah,
this.
right. Yeah, so the place people tend to bring it up is in Slack. Yeah, and I think Stefan ends up fielding quite a lot of those.
Yeah, so
Thank you, Stefan.
I've seen like three types of users that are quite upset of our design. Some users want to not share any kind of Git push secret with app teams. So they create namespaces for app teams where each app team can deploy their own things, but the platform admin doesn't want to give them right access to the fleet repo where everything is. So that's one thing. Because, well, any person that has read access to that namespace can, fetch the secret, and then it can do whatever they want on that repository. I don't know, delete the whole production cluster and so on, right? They can do whatever if they have push access. To this, I've responded with, PGP signing, but that's also not possible because the PGP keys will also be in that secret. So yeah, unless we allow cross namespace reference for these users, they cannot use Flux image automation. And I'm inclined on telling people, hey, don't use Flux image automation, you just use GitHub Dependabot or something else in your CI that, it's outside of the cluster. So that's one use case with, I don't want keys to be shared outside the Flux system namespace. Another thing is about, another complaint is about fact that so other people, they want to have the automation in a dedicated namespace, like Flux automation namespace, and place all things there. And then the problem arises with, hey, I have to now copy all the image pull secrets from all these namespaces into this namespace because I cannot refer to image pull secrets from outside, or even if my Kubernetes nodes are allowed to pull the image tags from ECR, GCR, whatever, doing an IAM role or something similar, or just binding the node to that particular IAM role. Flux is not able to query the registry because we need a secret. We cannot use the token that's maybe in the pod or maybe in the node space. And I think there is a pull request. Someone created a pull request to add this kind of discovery for AWS using environment variable, use AWS or whatever. That should definitely not be the case. We shouldn't toggle things with inside the container pod, but maybe on the, I don't know, image policy custom resource. That's where I see these flags maybe. But so this is a different issue, right? People don't want to copy secrets, and they currently have a way of not doing that by assigning IAM roles to nodes where Flux runs. So Flux could, let's say, take the token, refresh the token, and so on. That's a different discussion. And the third one was about the fact that you have to generate, like, it's very similar to what's in Slack lately. You have to generate 2 objects for each deployment, and people are looking for an easy way out of this. Here, I think maybe we can create some kind of CLI command, and point the CLI to a deployment manifest, then the CLI could generate for you an image repository YAML and an image policy YAML. based on a couple of flags that you supply. Let's say the semver range, or I don't know, regex, and it should discover the image URLs inside the deployment spec and generate those for you. It's just an idea. I don't know if it will actually help, but there is no way around creating all these objects. So that's it.
Certainly, someone lots of the stuff is on record and discussed. I think all of those things in various proposals or issues. Yes, those are all things. A lot of it comes down to it's just difficult to use secrets because they're namespaced, and lots of scenarios in which you want to kind of have a secret but not make it available to other people, but give those people some capability based on that secret, is impossible because of the way Kubernetes API is designed. You can't do that without subverting the namespaces, which happens and people end up doing in various ways. But you have to go outside the sort of API to do it. So, I mean, ultimately, if we want to help those people, we'll probably have to do something like that. There's several suggestions outstanding.
Yeah, what we could do is add the namespace to the source ref and modify the current policy that we use in our multi-tenancy repo to enforce namespace isolation inside image update objects, the same way we do for customization and hand releases. To me, that's a thing that, works the same as with all the other Flux APIs and is enforced through a third-party tool until the multi-tenancy proposal takes shape.
Yeah, I mean, we've talked about this before, but it seems really weird to me that that an automation like that would have to use impersonation. That seems to me to be a kind of admission that the design is wrong.
No. I'm not talking about impersonation. I'm talking about validating with the webhook that you are allowed or not to refer to sources from other namespaces.
Oh yeah, okay. Falling back to a third party to enforce the default, what should be the default rules is also an admission, I think, that the design is fundamentally unsound. But
that's how policies are being done in Kubernetes. Are you saying that everybody is doing it wrong? I mean,
no, I'm saying that if it shouldn't be a policy, it should just be the behavior that you can't do that. You see what I mean? It shouldn't be like it's open to abuse unless you use a third party thing to close it down. It should be, it's not open to abuse. Secure by default is what I'm talking about. Anyway, we've had this discussion many times in different forms.
I have a similar hurdle in a different context. It's further down on the agenda. Related, I don't know if you want me to just jump in and talk about it now. Let's get it out of the way.
Yes.
We have there's a tool called Octito. I'm going on their community call tomorrow to present how you can use Octito with Flux, Octado. And one of the issues that's outstanding since the Flux v1 change is that you used to be able to suspend individual resources from reconciliation, which I obviously understand the reason why that's probably not supported anymore is because it breaks all kinds of guarantees about atomicity of application, and we really want to be able to guarantee that if your commit is valid and Flux says it's been applied, then the whole thing has been applied. But it's super inconvenient for Octeto because Octeto actually replaces the deployment spec with another one. It can do it using a webhook if you have their enterprise stuff installed, or it can just use a patch to do it. And in Flux v1, it was able to set the ignore annotation, and it's not anymore. So along the lines of this is open to abuse, I don't know if there's any possibility that we could add a flag to a customization that says this is a dev customization and we want to open it to abuse, or, you know, I'm not sure of a better solution. I haven't thought of one yet, because right now, the difference between Flux v1 and Flux v2 is if you're using these tools together in Flux v1, you need to set a configuration in a file somewhere that tells it what annotation to add to the deployment that it modifies, and then you're done, and you don't ever have to think about it again. But on Flux v2, you have to figure out what customization is syncing that deployment, and then suspend it, and remember to unsuspend it when you're done. So the Flux Trace feature goes a long way, I think, towards making that easier. But it's still 3 things that you have to know where before you really didn't have to know any things. So.
Yeah, the ignore annotation is not coming back. The way you should mutate things in cluster are through webhooks, like Kyverno does it, like Gatekeeper does it, like all sorts of integrations out there. And if the webhook mutates the object, then it's okay with Flux because it will not be a mismatch. It's okay, you have something in Git, you send it to the API does a bunch of stuff to it. And if you do it again, it will have the same result because the same stuff will be injected. So there is no drift, even if in theory, okay, the webhook changes, adds things and so on. But without the webhook, we cannot allow people, because then imagine kubectl edit and all this stuff. You'll maybe leave all these annotations out there in cluster. They are not represented in Git in Flux 1, so you have no idea why now the things that are in Git no longer apply on the cluster. So I'm not for making this kind of trade-offs in Flux 2, and the way customized controller works is it's not even possible to do that. Not to mention Helm. How are you going to deal with Helm? What if a deployment comes from a Helm release? It's not only about customizations here, right? Not even with Flux 1, you couldn't tell Helm operator, hey, apply this Helm release, but do not apply some object from inside of it. Helm has no such feature. Customize has no such feature. So I don't see it possible in version 2.
I haven't been using their enterprise stuff lately, but it sounds promising what you're saying, that the webhook probably will still work.
Yeah.
So, okay, cool. I'll bring that with me.
This needs to be tested. I mean, I've tested some stuff with Kyverno mutations, and it worked as expected. There was no conflicts. Yeah, I mean, that's the only chance you have on getting done. Or, of course, suspend the customization or the Helm release that deals with that particular workload, do the dev stuff on it, and then unsuspend it. It's the same thing as, what's the difference between running a suspend command and running the annotation command on Flux 1? There are only 2 commands that you have to run: suspend, unsuspend, add annotation, remove annotation. In the end, there are same things.
For a downstream application developer, though, it's not the same, because you can add an annotation and you have to patch a spec, and it's just not exactly the same. That's all. But
Yep.
Yeah. Should we move on to the next item?
Sure. Yeah, I have a couple of small things related to docs in the website. So we managed to move all the V1 and Helm operator docs over. Everything is replaced by redirect, and things seem to be working. If that's not the case, let us know, or let me know. in the website PR342 is a pull request where I tried to put together like a very simple integrations page where we can easily show off like all the tools that sort of integrate with Flux. If there's anything missing on there, or if you have any feedback, how we can make it more beautiful or whatever else, just let me know. And I wanted to thank Edwin for putting in a couple of PRs to link check all our docs and the community documents as well. This is great. So that's for docs and website. Any questions? And then I had a small admin thing. I just noticed that the last meeting videos hadn't been uploaded yet. So, and I know I wasn't around. I couldn't make most of the last meeting, so I just didn't think about it. I'm wondering if there's anything we would need to make easier, you know, to improve the process, or
There's probably ones that I recorded, although not last week, but I just forget because I kind of finish the meeting and then move on to whatever else. And I have in my head that there's some gap between finishing the meeting and the video being ready to do anything with. So I think, oh, well, I'll come back to that. And then I never do.
I don't know. Yeah, maybe we can ask Alice, and maybe in the Kubernetes world, they have like a clever tool to do something. I'll take an action to talk with her.
Yeah, even if it's just a reminder the day after or something, actually, it might be.
Send you an email.
Yeah.
The recording is ready. Do something with it.
Yeah, there was also one meeting where someone shared their screen, not realizing that, you know, very briefly, not realizing that it was publicly recorded, and then I didn't know how to edit that out, so I thought, oh well, I'll figure that out later, and then never did. There is a pattern here.
But was that video dealt with, or is it still? I was thinking, okay, I'll just go and upload the remaining ones, but if I know like one of them is not kosher to go on YouTube.
Yeah, I need to figure out which one it was. I don't think it was super harmful.
Let me know, because we've edited some of the videos in the past. Yeah.
Okay.
All right, I'll talk to Alison and talk to you about the other videos. Kingdom, you want to talk about the Helm operator?
Yeah. So the Helm operator is getting its first new release in, I think, over a year. 1.3.0 will include lots of updates, but no breaking changes, and we'll do very shortly after that 1.4.0, which will break support for Kubernetes versions less than 1.16 based on the CRD v1 change. So like everything else, it's using CRDs. If it wants to use v1 CRD, it has to be on the newest, new enough version of Kubernetes, and the v1 beta 1 will go away in Kubernetes 1.22.0 release. So I've tested manually the builds on 1.22.0 alpha 3, and it looks good. Last night the build failed, looked like for an unrelated reason, EOF something, network related. Tried it again this morning and it's going along. So we should have 1.3.0 and 1.4.0 RCs today. And hopefully final releases by the end of the week to go with the new release of Flux.
Very good.
Any more feedback or questions for Kingdom? All right, Stefan, the Flux-based command.
Yes, so with Flux multi-tenancy and other complicated setups that you can make using Flux 2. It's quite challenging if you look at the cluster objects in clusters, like where is this deployment coming from? Because yeah, now you no longer have one Flux instance, one Kubernetes cluster, one Git repo. Now you can have many Git repos and many overlays, many Helm releases, and so on. And in order to make I don't know, introspection more easily, when you just look at the cluster and you don't have to read through all your or search through all your repos, I've wrote a proposal to add the Flux trace command. And the Flux trace command, what it does, you point the Flux CLI to your cluster, and you ask the Flux CLI, hey, trace this Kubernetes object for me. You give it the Kubernetes object name. Let's say it's a Kubernetes deployment. So you give it the deployment name, the namespace, the kind, and the API version. So Flux, the CLI can determine exactly what object you are looking for. And then it will create a report for you with what thing is reconciling that. It is a Flux customization, is the Flux Helm release, or other things. Where does that object originates from? Is it a Git repository? Which branch? Which commit, and so on. And also for this also works for Helm releases. Like with Helm releases, is even more challenging to debug what's going on, because you have a Helm release, and the Helm release generates a Helm chart object, and the Helm chart object is being created from a Helm repository or a Git repository. So if you want to trace back where a deployment comes from, you have to do some digging, and you also have to understand how Flux works pretty well. With this trace command, I think it makes everything more clear. All the objects involved in a reconciliation are listed there, and it also helps with debugging. So assuming you have a Helm release failure, the failure can come from various places. Maybe the Helm repository is no longer accessible, or maybe the chart version that you specified is no longer there, or has never been there, or so on. So you have to do kubectl get events, kubectl describe on at least 3 or 4 objects. The Flux trace command basically creates a report from all of that and presents it in a nice way. It will also show any errors, no matter the object. So if it's let's say a Helm repository error, you'll see that. If there is a chart issue, you'll see that, or maybe the Helm release itself, I don't know, the values YAML are not valid or something like that. You'll also see all these errors combined in a single view. That's about it. I'm going to need some help improving this command in the future. I plan to leave it as it is for now, the first version, which is like an MVP, if you like. There are 2 things missing, in my opinion, is the fact that if you do Flux trace on an object like a pod, you'll not get a result. The CLI will tell you, hey, this pod is not managed by Flux. Of course, pods are not managed by Flux. Pods are managed by replica sets. Replica sets are managed by a deployment, and that deployment is managed by Flux. So a good improvement, a good iteration on this feature is if we don't detect the Flux labels on a particular object, we should look at owner references and go throughout them until the last parent. And there, if that particular object is managed by Flux, then we should tell the user, hey, this pod is managed by Flux because, well, replica says deployment and then deployment is, and list everything around deployment. So that's one thing for further improvements. And the second one is, so you can have a deployment that comes from a Helm release. And if you do Flux trace for that deployment, it will show you, okay, this one comes from this one chart and a Helm repository. But that particular Helm release is probably also in Git. So there is a customization that applies that. So if you want to change the Helm release, you still don't know where it is. You have to do Flux trace that particular Helm release to see the trace of that. So instead of running two commands, I imagine that, let's say you do Flux trace for a deployment, the deployment comes from a Helm release, but we also look up, hey, is this Helm release coming from something else, and list there the whole tree, like, okay, this Helm release comes from this customization that's defined in this repo. So you'll know exactly where is that Helm release and where you'll go and change it.
So I think this is a good idea. The trace thing, for all the reasons, Stefan, you've said. The biggest barrier, I reckon, to understanding what Flux is doing a lot of the time is that you are kind of encouraged, if not forced, to have chains of syncs that sync other things, like a customization that syncs a Helm release that does some other stuff, or even a customization that syncs a customization or and Git repo. So I think the following tracing things transitively is really important. It might even be maybe the kind of after the absolute minimum, like the second most important thing, I reckon.
Yep. Yep. You should. I mean, it's not that hard to look up owner references and jump from one customization to another. Just you have to do some more querying with the API. My plan is, after we merge these, to create some two issues, one for the owner reference, one for the customization or Helm release apply tree, and mark them as help wanted, and maybe someone volunteers to do one or another. It's I think we also have some examples of how to do that in the Flux UI, because the Flux UI looks up the owner references right now. So the code is there, and there is a bunch of other projects on GitHub free that show you how you can jump from one reference to another and list the whole thing. Also, kubectl source code has that, but well, that's more complicated to read. There are many examples on that.
Good, cool.
Any more feedback or questions for Stefan?
No, I can just say I think it sounds like a really good thing. I'm looking forward to using it.
Thank you.
Well, I think the last agenda item is from Kingdom.
Yeah, I mentioned in the last meeting that would be good to try a bug scrub event. And I went to SIG Contrabex meeting shortly after that, and I found that SIG Node is doing a bug scrub, and it starts tomorrow. And it's a 2-day global event, and it's going to be grand in scale, and they have all kinds of load balancing tricks that they're going to try to do to split up all the bugs so that they all get attention. And I don't know if anyone wants to attend. I won't be able to attend much myself, but I'm going to try to take some lessons so we can make our own bug scrub a little bit better when we do it. And also to put on the table, we haven't set any kind of a date. If anyone has an opinion about when we should do this, or if we should repurpose an existing meeting time so that we have one on the calendar. It's a time when people will likely be available. I wasn't thinking that this would be a 2-day event or global in scale. I was really thinking a lot smaller, like let's get a couple of people in a room and just go down the spreadsheet the way I've been doing it with Flux V1, which is a process in and of itself, but I have a tool that's generating a spreadsheet so that you can avoid backtracking, and that seems to be enough process for me. I imagine it would still be enough with 2 to 5 people volunteering. It might be a struggle with larger than that, but I don't really think so because we have enough repos that even with more people than that, we have to split it up somehow, and there are natural boundaries that make sense. But back to the original question, does anyone have an idea when we should do this?
One week from now, 2 weeks. The faster we do it, the better it will be to define some procedure that works for us. It will be trial and error, I'm guessing, a couple of first meetings. So.
Does anyone have an opinion about if we just made it Wednesday at 8 Eastern? So the same time as this meeting, but next week. So it's not.
It's okay, me. Maybe you want to reach to Alice and Scott and others and
Yep.
see if they are available. But yeah, that sounds good.
I'm just going to post that to the Flux contributors and the Flux channel.
I think we have one issue on it, right?
Yep.
Okay, post it on the issue, baby. Maybe.
Perfect. That's it for me.
Great. Any last agenda items or anything you wanted to get out of this meeting?
Oh yeah, so one last thing. Yesterday we released Flux 0.15.3, and we finally figured out what's going on with libgit2 and Azure DevOps. So the 0.15 releases broke Azure DevOps SSH cloning due to some issues that we had with OS packages. Instead of the OpenSSH package, we ended up with a different one that didn't understood all the keys all the modern SSH keys. So that was a big issue for the Azure DevOps users. We finally managed to fix it. So if you are running on Azure DevOps, please upgrade to 0.15.3 and things will start working again. We still have an issue with image automation controller. I thought the image automation controller uses the same code as source controller, but it seems that it doesn't. So yeah, the image automation controller still fails with cannot extract public key from private key. I have no clue what's going on there. All the
Which same code to do what?
Hmm?
The uses the same code as source controller to do what? To clone?
Yeah.
Yeah, it does use the same code. It just uses source
So
controller
it's
slash
like,
package.
this is like yet again some voodoo.
Hmm. I
Voodoo
mean,
right?
it uses it in a slightly different way, but
Yeah. So
but I mean, yeah.
People are bootstrapping Flux with ED keys instead of RSA keys. Bootstrap works. Source controller can clone the repo, no issues there. Once they set up the image policy and they use the same, they point to the same Git repo and the same secret, the automation controller cannot clone the repo. switching between GoGit and libgit2 has no longer any effect, right? So something there is definitely different. I cannot explain it otherwise. I mean, it's like we use the same Debian image now, the exact same packages, and yeah, there are still there. I can give you the link to the issue. So that's something we should fix when we do the V1 beta 1 thing. That was the last thing I want to mention.
Okay. Add it to the list.
To reproduce this, you don't need Azure DevOps.
No, just using a key of that kind should work, right?
Yeah, like Bootstrap allows you to specify the key algorithm. So you can say, yeah, I want ED, whatever. So just doing that, it should fail.
Yeah, still trying to chase down a bug with empty commits, which is hard to
We have
reproduce.
some really hard bugs, hard to reproduce at least, because if we can reproduce it, then we can definitely fix it. But if we cannot reproduce it, it's like really.
In some ways better than having lots of easy to reproduce bugs. So, so there is that.
All right. Thanks a lot, everyone. And I'll see you online.
Cool. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Good day.